Yeah, hey, assalamu alaikum, everybody. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, salatu ala rasulullah. Appreciate again the assistant team and scheduling and organizing these sessions. And thank you all for those that are joining us live. Thank you all for attending. Inshallah, what I'm going to do is I'm going to recap the crux of the main concepts and points from our conversation back in the CISNA conference earlier this year around the topic of strategic talent retention. And I think we spent quite a bit of time on this topic, and I think the objectives at a high level were, I think we wanted to get a sense about the definition of what talent retention was, and then we wanted to discuss some key strategies, particularly on retention practices. How do we ensure and how do we ensure that we can retain our top talent? And then some of the best practices, if you will, around performance management, development, engagement, that will really improve retention more broadly. Were some of the key concepts that we shared when we were together. Um, I'll start off by saying first and foremost, and I think for those that are hearing this for the first time as well, um, any organization's most important resource is their people. Are the It's not the building, it's not the curriculum, it's not the books, it's not the size, it's not the budget. It is absolutely the people, our human resources, our people, our leaders. They're the number one most important asset that any organization manages. So really thinking strategically about this was the concept here. We had talked about the importance of understanding talent management and understanding retention more broadly, and how that's so key and so critical for us as school leaders. We then talked about the importance of understanding the employee life cycle. And if we are going to be really effective in managing our talent, our employees, understanding all the different stages of the employee life cycle are critical. For every single organization, for every single employee, they are somewhere on this life cycle. Are you attracting? Are you attracting how you communicate your school, your branding, the way people talk about you as a means of attracting talent, how you recruit, how you hire, how you, what are those practices, who you go after. I think that's an important part of the talent life cycle. The onboarding practices, what are the first 30, 60, 90 days? A lot of research around that and how that's so critical for how people feel at the beginning of their engagement with your school, with your organization. How do you retain talent, which is really our focus for this session, but then also how you develop and how do you separate from talent, right? All of these are some of the key aspects of the talent life cycle. And we spent a little bit of time really diving into, first and foremost, identifying the different categories of our talent. So before we think about retention, I think it's important to kind of assess where is your talent, where are your people in terms of how you identify their value to the organization. And I gave a simple framework during that time, and this is a 9 box that's pretty popular within the talent management space, really well known, and it has essentially 2 metrics that it wants any administration or any leadership team to think about their talent. Essentially, the x-axis talks about performance. So as people are performing, they're competent, they're capable, you see them further on the right side, right, as the x-axis is going towards the right side. And then on the y-axis, you see their potential. Potential means, do they have skills, capabilities, passions, interests that really align with my organization? They might not have tapped that potential yet, but you see it in them and your ability to harness that from them. That's the y-axis. And so obviously, as we talked about in our live session, it's really critical to focus on the people that are really your highest performers and those that you see with the highest potential. Those are what we would call, again, there's so many different 9 box names. I just try to pick the simple one, but these are definitely the ones that are at the very, very top right are your star performers. These are the ones that have the highest potential and the highest performance. They're very capable, they're very strong, they're very passionate about the organization, you see a lot of potential for them to continue and grow with you. And that's a critical group that you really have to identify and work with and concentrate on. So that's your stars. And of course, anything other than that, anybody that is, if they're a high performer and they have the potential, or if they have high potential, but they're moderate in their performance, these are also key people, key talent to identify as. A lot of times in really healthy organizations, this is a list that they know. These are names that that they assess maybe sometimes twice a year, or at least every year. You're kind of bucketing your staff, your talent in these places. And then you have your core performers. And these are really critical. They're moderate in their performance, they're moderate in their potential, but they're really good kind of core performers within the organization. Then we kind of highlighted, and I'll change the color. Then we talked about people that are very high performing, but they don't have a lot of potential, meaning that they've kind of hit their ceiling and what they can do, and that's okay, and that's good. They're solid performers, and you identify them as such. And then your potential gems are people with high potential, but they're still low in their performance or their competence or their capability. And we talked about each of these groups needs their own plan of retention, of engaging, developing, so on and so forth. And then last but not least, just to finish the explanation of this, and I'm going through this fairly quickly. I think we spent quite a lot more time on it in person, but the last group, and this is the group that is really important for an org to identify, is people with low performance or low potential. And really, we consider these people either average performers, inconsistent players, or they're just risky. They're risky to hold on to. They're risky to just kind of maintain for the sake of maintaining. And really healthy organizations understand how to move these folks this way, and then how to move these folks out of the organization. And it seems harsh. It seems tough to say that. I know we have brotherhood, and we believe in like camaraderie and all the all the good stuff around brotherhood, sisterhood in our organizations. And I'm not calling for people to just be firing people left and right, but you have to have a healthy way to move people through your org that are just you've identified them as such, and you've worked on them, try to improve them, try to give them feedback, try to nurture their development. But we as nonprofits need to have the ability and the courage to be able to not just elevate the people that are high performing, but move people out that are just going to hold back the organization, the school, the admin, so on and so forth. I think sometimes our tendency is to hold on to people too long when we know that they are a risk. And so that's something to think about. We made this breakdown of this and path, and I really encourage teams to take this back and really yearly think about the HR elements, the talent management pieces for their schools. And we had a good discussion on like how do you identify these people, what roles do they tend to play, and how do you support them. I'll pause here to see if there's any questions on this. This was a key kind of concept that shaped the entire session, because identifying where talent are is so critical to retaining them and deploying techniques to retain them. So I'll pause here to see if there's any questions on this 9-box. Okay, I also don't see any questions in the chat. Okay, so what we then said was that we talked about if you hone in on identifying your talent and where they fall, there's generally kind of 3 concepts that are really critical to retention. So we talked about the importance of managing key staff effectively. How do you make sure to have really good management practices? We talked about the need to develop people consistently. How are we continuing to nurture and make people feel like we're in a school, we're in academia. How do people feel like they're in that development, even in their current roles? And then how do we support engagement? So broadly, some of the concepts of engagement. So if I were to dive in the first one, we give a number of things I think that are really important to development. I mean, to managing people effectively. And here, there's a lot of things that we can discuss and talk about. I think I specifically talked about the importance of performance management and what does that look like at a school-wide level, and how do we do that? And I think I shared that generally some of the best practices, particularly with your more senior leaders. So I'm talking here about a board managing. I think this was the case of like a board managing a principal, and how that would be. How would that happen? What would be the best practices? I think generally, first and foremost, maybe I'll start at the bottom. I think 3 should be one. I think the best practices of performance management are always documentation. Being able to document people and having different moments of checking in on people on their performance. You have maybe quarterly or bi-yearly or definitely annually performance conversations, performance reviews where things are documented, how people are doing, what they should improve on, areas of growth for them, things that they need to develop. That documentation is really important to managing people effectively. It absolutely helps year over year. It helps for things to be objective rather than subjective. So that's a critical kind of check mark, if you will, that we talked about during our session. We then, sorry, I didn't mean to click through. I actually just wanted to use a pen and highlight that. We then talked about the cadence, right? How do we have performance check-ins at appropriate cadences? Long gone is the concept of having once a year performance reviews. I mean, that is antiquated to say the least. I think healthy organizations nowadays have quarterly performance check-ins, and they do bi-yearly formal reviews. That is like just a more healthy, frequent cadence of feedback and input. And what am I seeing? What are you seeing? How can it improve? Where can we grow? How can things happen? So that's a really important best practice that's key here. And then I talked about the need for having just a committee that is focused on your top and your key talent. So most nonprofits I know, especially schools, they don't necessarily have an HR function or an HR department. It probably doesn't happen. So you can either create a committee. It can be a board. Maybe it's board members and admin. Maybe it's just board. Maybe it's just admin, given the dynamics of your school, the size of your school. But how do we make sure to identify the key performers, the key high performers, star performers, core players? How do we make sure to identify them? And then how do we make sure all these other things are happening, right? That we're engaging them, we're supporting them, we're developing them. We know who they are. We have a plan for almost each person to some extent, particularly if they're your key talent. So that requires again an effort, a practice here that I think sometimes schools particularly don't not don't follow, but sometimes it's harder for us to follow. And again, it creates this solid, better management practices for people to feel like there is a sense of somebody following up on me, checking in on me, documenting my growth. And then there's somebody that is strategically thinking about me as a high performer or a key talent, and how they're trying to nurture my retention within the organization. I'll pause here to see if there's any questions on these best practices that we talked about. Just Zakaria, Aisha, Gul, anything that I can elaborate on.
Assalamualaikum. Yeah, I have a question about document all discussions. What do you mean by that?
Every single performance conversation should always be documented. And what I mean by documented is that the notes around what was discussed, what were the strengths, what were the positives, what were the areas that needed incremental improvement, what are the areas that need significant improvement. And that needs to be documented and shared both with, I think what I mean by documentation is the conversations are documented, then that feedback or that report is formally given to the employee so that they see it. and it is something that they are tracked with in their next performance review or their performance cycle in the performance, whether it's the next quarter or the next bi-yearly. Why is that key? It is important because I think we become very subjective very quickly. First of all, do we have organizational goals? Do we have individual goals? Are there clear expectations? So I always say accountability is about expectation. If we don't create expectation, if we don't communicate that expectation, if we don't follow up on those expectations, we can't hold people accountable effectively. It just becomes interestingly, I've been talking to a few schools. It becomes like he said, she said. We think they're bad, they think they're good. Arguments, fights, conflicts, tensions, and you just simply ask people, "Hey, do you have documented performance reviews?" They're like, "No, the board knows. We talk about it all the time, or we always tell the brother, or we always tell the sister," and that's just not a professional way of doing it, and it's not what I would consider again best practice. So that's what I'm kind of alluding to. How do you as a school systemize and standardize some of this to be able to be done consistently and equitably?
So, salam alaikum,
Alaikum
Brother
salam
Rami.
barakatuh.
Do you have any examples? Because do you have any examples where we can have sort of a sustainable way to do this? Because we may start out the school year all gung ho, and then the school year happens. And so, if you have like some forms to share with us, that
Forms,
would be
yes,
great.
sure. So I'll be honest with you. So Sister Aisha, I think there's a few things here. Number one, I think the philosophy for the leadership of the school has got to be there. That this is our philosophy. So this is our performance and accountability structure. I think you
Okay.
can even I actually do it with my team, and I manage a small team, but I just generally do it all the time. And of course, we consult on it all the time. Different kinds of not masjid looks different than a school and so on. But honestly, I would just block out time on calendars for teachers and admin to have them. I think there are, if you do it at the, if you do it at the, particularly at the end of the year, the midpoint and the end, very formally, you have a day blocked out. Everybody knows that they've got to report and bring these in. I highly encourage that. I believe there's softwares out there that can be leveraged. And
Okay.
Sister Aisha, I 100% know for sure that if your school were to input its values, expectations, roles, responsibilities, whatever it may be, into AI and contextualize it to the teacher, the subject, the department, the position, it will pull out the best forms that you can utilize and pull. Like I actually, guys, I think just as a forms are becoming outdated now. Like that, there's no need to have a template or a form because AI can generate super duper highly contextualized forms that you can utilize or you can adapt for your school and your environment very quickly. So that would be my recommendation about an actual document or a format.
Okay.
And there's different, of course, ways that you can structure it. I'm just trying to communicate the concept of like we're going to commit to doing it. We're going to commit to identifying our key talent. We're going to commit to checking in on them and having these performance check-ins. And we're going to commit to documenting them really, really well in a way that, again, people year over year see their growth, see their, there's a level of care, interest, growth that people feel just from those conversations.
Thank you. This sounds really good.
Yep. And there's a lot of from a software perspective, I think there's a lot of good softwares out in the market as well that can you just input into it and it saves it as a database, right? You make profiles for people, you make profiles for your teachers or your admin. It keeps it for you, it tracks it for you. You're able to input those findings. It's able to shoot out a report to the employee. There's a lot of good tools. I know, again, I'm not uh, um, I think I mentioned I'm not a school administrator. I've never been directly involved in Islamic school, but I know really well the talent management space. And I think if we incorporate some of those concepts into schools, it would really help teachers, admin, principals, more senior leaders within a school for sure. So you can
But
pull
Brother
a
Rami,
tool.
can you, sorry,
Yeah,
can you share some examples of these software?
sure.
Um,
Yeah, yeah.
they,
Yeah, I mean, I'll just name a few, and I appreciate you asking. Amongst them are softwares like Lattice. There's, you know, I don't know what, there's a lot of human resource information system platforms that could be able to do it as well. I'm not sure what everybody's leveraging and utilizing, but sometimes if you do have an HR system for your school, it probably has some kind of performance management software usually integrated into it, or you can get a Lattice or something of that like that will actually just solely do it for you. Um, so off the top of my head, there's others out there, but I can offer that as a follow up, or again maybe a simple AI search for your school that can probably pull up some really resources I might not even know about.
thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome. Um, I've been leaning very heavily into the AI the past 6 to 8 months, so I think we all should. It really boosts our own individual productivity, if not our organizational effectiveness. Any other questions on these best practices before I go to development? Okay. I shared a number of career development philosophies I think that are really important for boards and school administrators and leaders to understand. The key one I think that was important when it comes to development and the approach that is critical is around the concept of the 70-20-10 principle. It's really popular within the professional development, HR development space when we talk about how do we help somebody's career develop. I think 10% of that will come from formal education that we can initiate and roll out. So formal learning that folks, seminars, webinars, certifications, things that people can access. That's 10% kind of development. About 20%, and maybe even growing now 30%, is kind of the concept of exposure. How do we expose our talent to peer learning, coaching, mentoring, networking? Can we allow them to have exposure to be able to grow themselves in their careers? And then still 70% predominantly development. And this is important for us to emphasize. Most of your development happens with experience that you will create on the job activities, experiences that you will facilitate for your staff, your teams. So understanding this concept is key for how we facilitate development, because you kind of want to reverse engineer, how do I generate experiences that they need? How do I offer exposure that they need? How do I offer formal education that they need? Uh, Sometimes I think even schools, you can get overwhelmed, like, we need to pay for people's education. Actually, if we're just masterfully creating experiences that allow people to feel like they're growing, that's probably strong enough. And then you don't need to give out stipends for people to get masters or anything like that. So, but that was a conversation that we had. I think I talked about development stages having kind of three key steps, and I'm not going to elaborate on all these steps today, but just generally, how do you understand the individual, or how do we assess individuals? That's important. And what I mean by here is, how do we get to understand what people are passionate about, interested in? How do we identify their skill gaps? How do we identify, again, from the same, it ties into the performance piece, right? If if I identify public speaking as a skill gap, or class management as a skill gap, or interaction, leading and managing of peers in a department as a skill gap, you really got to understand individuals to be able to, number two, discuss and create plans for development, right? So too many times we're not either at an individual level or a staff-wide level assessing the skill gaps and behavior gaps to be able to develop really strong development plans for people. So I think that's critical. And then to roll out and initiate support initiatives for that is kind of the third piece. Like, how do we get creative and maybe bringing a motivational speaker for a staff training? Or how do we send our teachers to different resources that they networks or conferences or things that are happening? How do we bring them to Cisna or bring Cisna to them to be able to initiate and support different things? Like, there has to be a understanding the individual's piece, having clear plans for the year around development, and then initiating and launching those support initiatives. You cannot undermine development when it comes to your key staff and your teacher, staff, admin. And so it really is about being intentional here. I gave some different tactics and approaches. I think I can highlight some of that. I talked about the importance of like creating educational experiences, right? So can we send people to trainings or offer certifications, have them attend conferences, or even create a book club, right, for teachers, or create a space where people can benefit from learning techniques and approaches that help, even, creating too little times organizations don't create their own internal communities of development. And that really can help, even if it's just like a channel where everybody's sending articles and videos around teacher practices or whatever it may be, right? Philosophies. The second, we talk about like how do you expose your staff to network, to shadow. How do you do that? How do you get them coaches potentially? I think that was the second component that we talked about. And then the third, and this is like practical things that you can do. How do you facilitate development through experiences? Well, you can challenge them, give them stretch assignments, increase their scope or ownership, allow them to lead new things, allow them to support new opportunities or to mentor someone. These are different ways that you can just generate development through experiences. It does not need to be, again, always send them to a conference. I think sometimes you've got to also generate experiences that they can grow in. So that was the key concepts around development or supporting people's development. Is there any questions that I can answer around this stage? Okay, no reflections, no questions. Fair enough. Okay, I will go through the third stage where I talked about the concept of engagement. And again, a very broad concept. I think a lot to cover when it comes to engagement. And what I talked about is, and we had defined engagement, meaning how do we get the most concentration and performance from the people that we work with. And I gave, we talked about a number of things, but the thing I like to highlight most is engagement really, it's situational. And what we teach in leadership is like, you have to play the role that's needed from you with the individual you're working with. I can sometimes, to engage somebody, I need to be a coach. I need to be there as somebody that encourages them, builds confidence, doesn't solve problems, but just kind of guides them through things. Sometimes engagement means I need to be a challenger. I need to push them. I need to challenge them. I need to get the best out of them by, being more direct and upfront with them. Sometimes engagement means I'm required to be a mentor. I just need to counsel. I need to offer advice and wisdom, and that's what they need from me to be engaged. And sometimes engagement means I need to be a sponsor of them. I need to recognize them. I need to showcase them to others. Engagement can mean different things for different people. And when we mean engagement, like, how do I get the best? We talked about potential earlier. How do you get people's potential to come to reality? A lot of times it's like this understanding how to engage them, and philosophies of like leadership management, your approach. And I think these are kind of four simple philosophies that if you were to fall under, and you understand, okay, how do I get the most out of somebody? They probably need one of these four things to be able to get the most out of them. So when we talk about engaging our staff, our talent, how do we think about this in creative ways? Again, I mentioned, like, if you challenge people with a stretch assignment, they might not have the courage for it, or they might, be hesitant. So you're going to push them. Sometimes people just need advice. Sometimes people just need you to hear them out. You just need to be a coach and just listen, just active listen the whole time, right? And sometimes people really need recognition, and you've got to really show that you recognize them more than others. That balance, I think, is what gets the most out of people, and understanding the people you're working with allows you to develop them, engage them, and as we said, all with the conclusion of retaining them, right? These concepts all tie into retention, which is really key for our staff. Without us needing to pay more, I didn't talk about increasing pay, and I didn't talk about any of those other things. I think sometimes we default to that being the only thing, but if we manage well, if we develop well, if we engage well, actually that increases our chances very highly to be able to retain talent.